Welcome to this video then on Inspector Calls for your GCSE English Literature exam in the summer. It's possibly the trickiest question because there's no extract for you to draw upon. You're expected to know some quotes. If you don't know quotes, you can't talk about language, and if you can't talk about language, then you can't climb to where those grade 5 marks are sitting in the mark scheme. So the purpose of this video, three things. Number one, some revision of Mr Birling as a character. Number two, knowing some key quotations that you might be able to remember and use in your exam. And thirdly, how to structure a response that's going to hit the grade 5 marks on the mark scheme. So, who is Mr Birling then? He's the father and head of the Birling family. He's proud of his achievements. He's grown from humble beginnings. He's created a successful business. He's been the mayor of his town. He hopes for a knighthood. He looks forward to the future, a prosperous one at that, thanks to the engagement of his daughter to Gerald Croft, who's the son of a hugely successful businessman in the upper classes, something that Mr Birling himself aspires to be. He's described by Priestley in the opening stage directions as a hard-headed man of business, which tells us something about the way he runs his business, if it's hard-headed. He's provincial in his speech, which tells us that he's got an accent. It reinforces the fact that he's grown himself from nothing. He's also said to be a pretentious man, which tells us that he speaks or behaves in a way that's perhaps more serious than is necessary in order to impress other people. So my top three quotes then for Mr Birling. Number one, you're just the kind of son-in-law I always wanted. Remember when you do your exam answer that we need to squeeze the spot on each quotation. So rather than talking about one thing in a quote and moving on to another one, if we focus on 2 or 3 really good quotes and squeeze all of the pus out of those quotes, so all of the language that's worth talking about, that will help us to get a much more detailed response. So in this quote, we can see that the engagement makes Birling more happy than his daughter because it's going to project him higher up the social ladder. The personal pronoun reinforces his selfishness here, the son-in-law I always wanted, regardless of how his daughter feels. The phrase wanted, that word wanted, makes Gerald seem like an object of desire, something that Birling wanted to accomplish or gain. The marriage escalates Birling's social standing, potentially making him more important and more wealthy as a result. So we really get a sense of how selfish this character is. The second quote, a man has to make his own way, has to look after himself and his family too, of course. Priestley uses some listing here, doesn't he? Notice the order of that though, that family comes last. There's also lots of male personal pronouns in there, himself and his, which is repeated, which gives us, which reinforces to us this idea of a patriarchal society, a society dominated by men. Priestley positions the audience here to dislike Birling right from the start. It makes us more likely to agree with the socialists. He's coming across as this really strange minded man who's only centred around making himself better off and kind of improving his own worth rather than anyone else's happiness. Third quote, look Inspector, I'd give thousands, yes thousands. The use of that word look shows Birling trying to level with the inspector as though they're all of a sudden they're equals. It's somewhat sycophantic as Birling tries to suck up to the inspector in order to gain some sort of advantage or to be let off perhaps. That repetition of the word thousands is also important. It reinforces to us here how Birling believes that he can pay his way out of anything in order to maintain his social standing, which is something that a lot of middle and upper class men would be known to do. They'd buy their way out of problems that they encountered in life. So how would we turn those quotes then into a paragraph and squeeze all the pus out of those quotes? Here's an example. We're going to stick to a straightforward what, how, why paragraph structure. Here's a question. How and why is Mr Birling an important character in an Inspector Calls? Well, the what, Mr Birling is integral to the play as he represents capitalism. How? Well, this is demonstrated when Priestley merges, a nice little phrase, listing with male pronouns. Notice we've talked about 2 techniques in one go. A man has to make his own way, look after himself and his family too, of course. There's that quote that we talked about. Priestley's use of the male pronouns here reinforce a patriarchal society, but also the idea that as a capitalist it's about putting himself and his business first. Interestingly, his family comes last in this list. This highlights perfectly the capitalist ideology. Priestley positions the audience to instantly dislike Birling and leads them towards a more socialist way of thinking. Notice how we've embedded context. We've not put context as a paragraph of its own right at the end. It's part of the answer. We've mentioned capitalism. We're showing the audience that we understand the difference between those two things. We've also in there put some nice phrases in like merges, which is a nice way of kind of making yourself sound a little bit more academic. And we've also analysed 2 words or techniques within that quote, remembering that analysing language doesn't have to be fancy techniques. It could just be word level. This word makes me think or feel. So I would do now is have a go at using one of the other quotes that we've looked at in this video to form a paragraph that is similar. There are some sample questions available on my website, mrcrawfordenglish.com/revision. You can use those. I've also put some Lightner Pack cards on there too because of the importance of knowing some quotes. They're cards with questions on the front, answers on the back. The idea is that if you get it right, it moves back a section in your folder. The instructions on how to use the pack are all on the website. If you get it wrong, it moves to the front. The further back the card goes, the more committed to memory it is, and the more chance you've got of remembering that quote when you hit the exam. But my advice, know 3 quotes in detail that you might be able to plonk into your writing in order to help you to hit that grade 5, remembering that language analysis is really important as part of this answer. Head to the website, download some stuff. You can also follow my Instagram, Mr Crawford, ENG. Laters.